So he made sure that was clear. But we have read a lot about the book in the paper, and I think he's certainly representing his county. Got his name in there a lot. He even had it paired up with Dan Gurley's, I noticed last week there. So I don't know. I told Buck and Senator Newton that we, down in Mississippi, we had some places there when people got up, they'd take chicken wire and put up in front of them, so if the beer bottles got flying, they'd be protected. But I said, I don't think we got a hostile audience. I think everybody's going to enjoy your speech. So everybody, please welcome our Rotary counterpart here, and Senator Bucky.
Thank y'all. Thank you very much. It's nice to be back. Nice to be standing up here instead of being introduced by Betty Jo. Thank you for inviting me again. I appreciate it. And I do have the good fortune up in Raleigh to see Garland on a fairly regular basis, and he is a breath of fresh air up there in the legislature. He conducts his business very seriously, and we sure do appreciate it up there. We have a lot of visitors, and sometimes people aren't always that happy to be around and let us know it. But it's good to be back in Rocky Mount. It's good to be back here at this Rotary Club. I very much appreciate the invitation. I look forward to many more in the years ahead. I assume that y'all want to hear about the legislature. I think that's why I'm here. It has been something that is, I think, quite different and somewhat historical. I have a lot of people ask me, what's it like, Buck? Is it what you expected? And so there's a few folks in this room that have heard part of this speech before, and I'll try to keep it fresh though. And they say, what's it like? And honestly, it's pretty much, for the most part, what I expected. It's a lot faster than I expected. When I say that, I mean we are moving at lightning speed. And let me give you some examples to try to make it clear. Traditionally, in past years, when the session opened, it usually took 2 to 3 weeks or so before everybody was situated in their office, and 2 or 3 weeks and maybe longer before everybody knew what their committee assignments were. Well, I knew what my committee assignments were 2 weeks before we started the session. And 2 weeks before we started the session, my legislative assistant was hired, and in her office, I knew where I was going to be, I knew what my phone number was going to be, and we had a computer before too long, and so we were able to start answering emails, of which there are quite a few. We have started passing legislation almost immediately. Basically, the following Monday after we opened the session on Wednesday, we were voting on bills, and we've passed quite a number. And we're only 6 weeks into this. And so that's a little bit of what it's like. It's just a different pace. It's very, very quick. And I'm happy for that, because we, for the most part, many of us that are new are business people. I do still practice law in Wilson, North Carolina, when I get the opportunity to come home and do it, and my clients enjoy seeing me, and I enjoy getting my bills paid. And so I'm told, and I'm very hopeful, that we are going to be out hopefully sometime in June. All things, if they continue to work at this pace, I think that's an achievable goal. Even if it's a little longer than that, as I said the other night, praise the Lord, my law practice will survive, because I have to earn a living, and this is not my paying job. This has been a lot of fun, but it does not pay for 3 children and a mortgage and everything else that everybody else in this room has to deal with. What else is different about the legislature than I expected? Well, candidly, there's a lot more lobbyists than I expected. It's not a bad thing. The lobbyists are helpful in many ways, because they're a great source of information, especially when we have so many things to consider. It's good to actually have somebody there that knows something about the subject to listen to, and then you have usually lobbyists or interest groups on the other side that educate you about the other aspects of it. But there are a lot more of them than I ever expected. When I worked in Washington, it wasn't that way. And maybe it was because it was over 20 years ago, or maybe it was because I worked on a committee staff when I was up in Washington, but I just didn't see that many of them. And in Raleigh, pretty much they're everywhere. And some of it probably is due to what's going on in the legislature and the historic nature of the changes. And many of you know it's been 140 years since the Republicans had control of the legislature. And I think that's an important point to make when we talk about the speed under which this transition has taken place. I'm very, very pleased and proud of the leadership that we have in both the House and the Senate. Not as familiar with the House, but in the Senate I am. There's nobody alive that's done that transition before. And I think that's important for people to understand. And I want to give credit to Senator Bass-Knight, who, upon his exit, was very, very helpful, I'm told by Senator Berger and others, was very helpful in a smooth transition and helpful about, basically, as Senator Berger put it, that should be the standard under which all future transitions should occur. And the wheel will turn, and there will be another transition, whether it's 2 years or 6 years or 20 years. There'll be another transition, and we need to keep that in mind because the citizens and what we're doing up there is a lot more important than playing games and hide and seek and seeing you know, how difficult we can make it for the next bunch that comes in. And so we very much appreciate that because it did let us get up and get things started. Let me talk a little bit about some of the legislative issues because I know there's some, I want to save some, I have about 15 minutes approximately. Somebody let me know when I'm about 10 minutes because I want to save some time for some questions if anybody has them. Some of the legislation that we've been doing, much of it we promised to do and we said we were going to do right off the bat. The charter school cap has been lifted as far as in the Senate. We passed that very quickly and moved that on to the House. That was an important thing. We passed some regulatory reform bills. We created a select committee to review all regulations and try to find ones that are costly and prohibitive that we ought to eliminate. And we passed a law that basically said that before any more regulations can be passed, if there are going to be any more cost, that we're going to freeze that right now. We're going to have a moratorium. Because why we got elected and why we want to go up there is to create jobs and improve our economy, and we felt that that was an important thing to do. One in particular that I was pleased with, and some folks may understand why, we passed a castle doctrine in the Senate. Now, for those who don't know what that is, that's a further enhancement of your right to self-defense. Basically, if someone is intruding into your home, you know, you don't have to call your lawyer and ask permission first. You can assume that they're out to do you harm, and if you're feeling threatened, you can go ahead and use deadly force if necessary. Most folks think that's pretty common sense. Most people kind of thought that was the law anyway, but we clarified that, and I was pleased because I added an amendment to that bill that extended that zone of protection out to your place of business and to your car. And the idea behind that was we have carjackings and we have invasions at businesses and domestic violence instances at businesses, and people ought to have the right to defend themselves. Something that's been in the news a lot in the Rocky Mountain area is annexation reform. I was one of the primary sponsors, and we passed a bill right away for an annexation moratorium. I know there are probably a few folks in the room that don't like that, but that was one of the campaign promises that I made early on when I was running, and I feel very strongly about it, and I feel very confident that we're going to have that moratorium passed through the House and give us a chance to have a very comprehensive and well thought out annexation reform bill. Another item that has been in the news a lot, which I'll touch on, I'm sure is important to some folks in here, is what's going to happen with Golden Leaf. Some of you probably have read articles in the paper and otherwise about questions about whether or not Golden Leaf is going to be eliminated or not. And I've gone on record as in full opposition to that. I have a lot of confidence that we're going to be able to convince folks that Golden Leaf is a good program, a good trust fund that needs to stay in place. There's often obviously challenges. There are folks from other parts of the state that really don't understand the history of the Golden Leaf, don't understand why we have that trust fund, and they don't really appreciate the fact that there are a lot of tobacco-dependent communities like Wilson and Rocky Mount, Elm City, and all throughout eastern North Carolina that really do need those funds and really do count on those funds to help us make that transition from our tobacco-dependent economies. But I'm hoping to help people understand that, and I feel confident that we'll be able to do that. But there's going to be a lot of talk about that. So, you know, when we have budget crisis like we have, and that's a good segue to the rest of what I'd like to talk about. We have a budget crisis like we do, somewhere between a $2.5 billion and $3.5 billion shortfall. A lot of people start saying, well, there's a big pot of money, a little under $600 million in the Golden Leaf Trust Fund. And, you know, a lot of people start saying, well, we can do a lot of things that we want to do with that money. And that's one of the fears I have. If we crack that ice, that other people from other parts of the state will get dollar signs in their eyes. And I know there are definitely conservatives and Republicans out there who think that's a good idea, but I don't. And I want to be clear about that. Let me talk a little bit about the budget, because I know that's been in the news quite a bit. We're really at the beginning stages of the budget, and let me say again, we have somewhere between a $2.5 billion and a $3.5 billion budget crisis. Now, what we're talking about is next year's budget. We're not talking about the current budget year that we're in. One of the things that we did in the Senate to try to address that was we passed Senate Bill 13. Senate Bill 13 was a bill that was designed to gather up as much money as we could out of this year and apply it towards next year's shortfall. Mostly the funds that we were trying to gather up were funds that weren't spent, funds that didn't need to be spent, try to sweep it all together. But it did include in intercepting this year's installment to the Golden Leaf. I felt like that was, everybody needs to put some skin in the game, and that was something I was willing to do. $67 million would have come from the Golden Leaf. And we passed that, and we sent it over to the House, and the House passed it, and the governor vetoed it. But altogether, if our numbers added up right, and I believe they did, we would have come up with about $800 to $1 billion towards next year's shortfall. That's a pretty significant amount, and that's a pretty large amount of money that we wouldn't have had to look at cutting out of some of our near and dear programs, some of the priorities that we have in the state, like education. And we were very disappointed when the governor vetoed that. But we have brought it back up again because we overrode her veto the other night, because we're looking at a lot of budget matters that are very, very concerning. One of them was that the governor proposed taking $100 million out of the Employment Security Commission Trust Fund, and you know that was done, so she says, in order to be able to pay state refunds, state income tax refunds. Well, I feel very strongly that people ought to have their money back. It's their money. It's not the state's money. That's been established. But raiding money from this trust fund in order to pay it back is a terrible idea. The reason it's terrible is because a lot of people don't know this, we owe $2.5 billion. Let me repeat that. $2.5 billion. We are in debt to the federal government for monies that we borrowed in order to pay unemployment benefits. And that's all a result of the Great Recession. There wasn't enough money in the trust fund to begin with, and with all the benefits that need to be paid, the only source that we had was to go borrow money from the feds. And that's what we did. And the $100 million that the governor proposes to take from that is money that we're supposed to be paying back to the federal government. And if we don't pay that money back to the federal government and work out a plan to do that, there's going to be a federal unemployment tax increase that's going to tax every single business that exists in this room, and every single business that exists in my district, and every single business that exists in the state of North Carolina. And it's going to be tremendous. We heard figures last week in a hearing that it may be as high as go up to $177 per employee. Now, that's not the way to create jobs. That's not what we need to do. So we resurrected Senate Bill 13, and we overrode the governor's veto, and it's on to the House, and the House may, at some point, do the same thing. And we hope that the governor will work with us on solving that problem, because what's going to happen is if that $100 million is taken, if that's what happens, someone's going to challenge that. Article 5, Section 5 of the North Carolina Constitution makes it very, very plain that taxes that are taxed for special purposes like that are to be spent on those purposes and no other. It's clearly an unconstitutional taking. Now that's been done in the past, but we have court cases now that clarify that. And what's going to happen is that someone's going to challenge that, and there's going to be an injunction, and people aren't going to get their state income tax refunds anyway, because the state's not going to have the money. So we're not interested in approaching it in that way. We think we can scrape together the monies from this year's budget in order to apply and provide the cash necessary to do that. Let me continue for just a moment about the budget, because we are fairly early in this process. And a lot of people are concerned about what's going to happen. Everybody rightfully is concerned about what's going to happen in education, with community colleges, with the universities, and lots of clean water trust funds. There are all kinds of programs out there. Let me just be real clear. I said repeatedly on the campaign trail, and I say repeatedly to you now, I'm not going to make everybody in this room happy. I did not get elected to make everybody in this room happy. I'm going to tell you the way I see it, and I'm going to do the best I can. We are in a crisis. Now, I did not create this crisis. This was not created on my watch. Everybody knows that. But I did raise my hand and say, I'll go up to Raleigh and try to fix it. I'm going to do the best I can. If you don't think I ought to cut this or vote to cut that, I'm happy to hear from you. But I'm going to ask you this question. If I don't cut that, which tax do you want me to raise? If I don't cut this, how many more teachers do you want there to be fired? How much more money do you want us to borrow? Those are the kinds of questions I'm going to ask you. Everybody in this room has a stake in this. We are physically on a ship that is sinking. We cannot sustain the spending that we've been doing. Our revenues will not support it, and the Great Recession has made that crystal clear. So I ask you all for your patience in this process, and I ask you all to understand that we are going to do the best that we can, and we are going to do our best to fund our priorities, and we are going to do our best to right our ship. Now, we went up to Raleigh to change things and to change the direction of this state, and I think that we're well on our way. Now, I understand that my time is pretty close to being expired, and so at this time, I'd like to stop, and let me just say this before I stop.
Senator, you've got
A few more minutes. I want to save some time for some questions, though. Let me say this before I stop, because I'm primarily hearing a lot from folks, and we get like 300 to 400 emails a day, and probably, depending on what day of the week it is, 100 plus phone calls a day at the office, and that's good. I have one legislative assistant, and she's very capable, and she's doing a good job of handling those things, and so far we're able to stay in front of it. But mostly what we hear about is education. And I have 3 children in public schools. You know, I want them to get the best possible education in public schools as they can. It's one of the reasons why I did support the charter school cap being lifted, because I think there needs to be more choices. Not that I want to send my children to a charter school, but I understand my 3 children are all different, and they all learn differently, and they all get different things out of the public schools. And in my case, I had one child that I did send to private school to a Catholic school for a few years, and it suited his needs. And I was glad that I had that choice, and I was glad that I had that opportunity. Not a lot of people can afford that, and I was very fortunate. But that school closed. That Catholic school doesn't exist in Wilson anymore. And parents need choices to make sure that their children are educated properly. A lot of discussion goes on about charter schools as if they're private schools. They're not. They're public schools, and they get funded a lot less. Under the new bill, if it passes, they'll get 70% of what traditional public schools get for the funding of a child. It costs over $8,000 to fund a child in traditional public schools. When you are not spending that much and the child is getting as good or better education and is happy because it's voluntary, that's something that we need to consider. So I'm going to do my best to look out for education, but I need everybody in this room to understand that education is 55% of the state budget when you count community colleges, universities, and K through 12. 55%. You cannot find $3 billion without looking to find some savings in education. It's just not possible. It will not happen. The question is where we cut, how deeply we cut, and where that leaves us for tomorrow. And that's what we're concerned about, and that's what we'll do. In closing, we are working very hard, and we are doing our best to do what is needed in this state. This state has had a direction that I don't want to be partisan, but this state has had a direction that the voters spoke and said we are not going in the direction that we need to have. And we are spending more than we need to be spending. And our budget increased over 60% in the last 10 years. Much faster than the rate of inflation, much faster than the rate of population growth with those two things combined. And we have to get on a sustainable path. So that is what our big test is ahead of us. And we have all kinds of other things like redistricting and other things that we're also trying to walk and chew gum on. But we can handle that, and I feel very confident in the leadership that we have and our ability to do that. So at this time, let me close by saying I appreciate all the support that I've had from folks in this room. If you need anything from me in the future, concerns about these issues, especially as we get deeper and deeper into the budget process, my office is always open to you. I'll be glad to give those numbers and email addresses, but it's on the website, of course, for the General Assembly. If anybody wants to write it down, it's 919-715-3030. That's the phone number. And we're there 5 days a week, and often I'm here in the district. One thing I did forget to add, and let me say this. I'm trying to do my best to get into the district as much as possible. Between family and practicing law and being in Raleigh, it's difficult with the calendar, but we're doing the best that we can. And I've had a number of meetings all throughout the district since even before I was sworn in. I've had meetings with Elm City Council about their water sewer problems, a moratorium they're under. Bailey has the same issues. I'm scheduled to meet with Nash County next week. I'm trying to come to meetings like this. I've met with Barton College, Community College in Wilson. Saratoga is supposed to be next Friday. I'm trying to get out there as much as I can to meet with folks. So if you have a group that you're with, a request, just contact us. We'll work a time on the calendar, and we'll get it done. And of course, anybody's welcome to come see me in Raleigh at any time as well. With that, I'll close and ask if there are any questions about the legislature. I'd be happy to try to answer. Yes, sir.
Senator, you spoke and you said about versus cutting versus taxes.
Yes.
There's a sales tax that is expiring.
That's right.
If that sales tax stayed in place, what would be the impact on that deficit?
The estimates that I've seen is that the sales tax generates somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 billion. The sales tax, the temporary sales tax that you're referring to, is not going to be renewed. And the reason it's not going to be renewed is two reasons. Number one, it's a temporary tax. And temporary taxes need to go away. And that's one of the reasons why I ran and why many of us ran, is because temporary taxes in this state, for some reason, become permanent taxes. And they just keep getting renewed and they never go away. That tax is going to expire, number one, for that reason, and number two, because most of us that got elected made a promise that that's what we were going to do. And so I'm not going to change my vote on that subject. We're taxed enough. We are the highest taxed state in the Southeast. There's no question about that. You can look at any measurement statistics that are out there. Some of you may recall a month or so ago that Illinois got a lot of attention because of their budget crisis. They decided they were going to raise taxes. I know for those that watch Fox News, it was talked about quite a bit. I think it was something in order of a 66% tax increase was what Illinois had. Well, what most people in this room don't understand is that even after Illinois has raised their taxes and made them a high tax state, their taxes are still lower than North Carolina's. Significantly lower than North Carolina's. So, taxes are not the problem in this state. The spending is the problem in this state. Let me give you one more example, and I don't mean to harp on that, but that's a good question, and I want people to understand why I feel so strongly about it. I'm on a subcommittee called Justice and Public Safety. It deals with all the spending in the court system. And we're trying to go, and all the other subcommittees are trying to go program by program to look at exactly what does the program do, exactly how much does it cost, how much has it been funded for its history, maybe not its complete history, but for at least the last 5 years or so. And this is just an example. We found a program that was called something like Children's Place or Children's Home, and I forget the exact name, but it was in Chapel Hill. And it started getting funds, I think, in 2003. Might have been 2005, but I'm pretty sure it was 2003. From that date until now, it has received almost $1 million in state funds. That program is yet to service the first child or the first mother. Now, that's the kind of spending that's been going on. If we had those millions of dollars from all the programs that are like that back and had never been spent in the first place, these questions about the spending problem and whether we're going to keep a sales tax in place that's supposed to be temporary or not would not be what we'd be talking about today. Yes, sir.
So you're saying that there are $3 billion worth of programs like that in our budget right now?
I don't know if there's $3 billion worth, but there are many millions of dollars like that. Many millions of dollars. Yes, yes.
Couple of questions.
Sure.
Someone, and because I'm getting ready to have to pay my corporate taxes on March 15th, and, then, of course, our personal taxes on April 15th, that was a big jolt to me, thinking about, I don't ever get a tax refund,
Neither do I. I'm familiar with the issue. My understanding is they were fraudulent tax returns, and I guess folks that are in prison aren't too worried generally about getting in more trouble, I guess.